Good evening, everybody. Welcome into Let's Talk Live here on the LTL Media channel. And I am very, very excited here today as I have my first political candidate ever on the show. And I was talking to Junah before she came in and said, the third attorney I've had on the show, but my first political candidate overall. And I want to welcome Djuna Perkins into the show. How are you?
I'm fine. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah. So tell me a little bit about yourself and how you became attorney and what you'll be doing here in 2026, challenging Michael Morrissey.
Sure. So I grew up in upstate New York. I was born in New York City. I went to college at Smith in Northampton. And like so many people, I came to Massachusetts and never left when I was 17 years old. I was lucky enough to get to Smith on a 100% financial aid, and I would otherwise not have been able to go to college. So that was a really big deal. Then I decided to go to law school because I wanted to make the world a fairer place for everyone. And so when I was in law school, the first semester that I was in law school, Carol DeMady Stewart was murdered. And so I had read the book Common Ground in college, and it was one of my favorite all-time books. And it really was... And so I watched with the rest of the city as the drama of her murder unfolded and all the tensions between the Boston police and the accusations that a Black man had killed her when in fact it turned out to be a domestic violence murder. So anyway, at that point, the die for me was cast. I was working as a clerk for Ralph Martin, who at that time was in the U.S. Attorney's Office. And I helped him investigate whether or not the Boston police should be charged federally with anything related to their conduct.
Can you just pull that microphone a little bit closer to you?
Sure.
Yeah, everybody's going, the sound's a little wonky.
Sir.
There you go.
Sir, yes, sir. Okay.
Let me see if everybody can hear Junah a little bit better. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
So anyway, I was I had a clerkship with Ralph Martin when he was in the U.S. Attorney's Office working on the Carol Stewart murder. And after that, I decided the die was cast. I knew I was going to be a prosecutor. So the second summer after law school, I was an intern in the Manhattan DA's office in the Public Integrity Division, which I specifically requested to be in. And most of what they prosecuted was corruption of public officials, including police. After I graduated from law school, I went to the Attorney General's office under Scott Harshbarger, served in the Safe Neighborhood Initiative and in the Narcotics and Special Investigations Unit and in appeals. When I left the AG's office, I went, Ralph by this time was the district attorney of Suffolk County. And so I went there. And in my last position there, I was the chief of the Domestic Violence Unit, which was with oversight responsibility for all domestic violence cases in Suffolk County, including those involving sexual assault. When I left there, I went to a small firm and for 9 years represented primarily victims of sexual abuse and discrimination in third-party litigation against schools, colleges, camps, nonprofits, the Catholic Church, other religious institutions. I also represented the family of Jalissa Brisman, who was the victim of alleged Craigslist killer Philip Markoff.
Oh, wow. You were involved in that?
Yes. And
wow.
I also wrote an amicus brief to the Supreme Judicial Court that resulted in the preservation of an important evidence rule in sexual assault cases. In 2012, I decided to open my own practice. And since then, I've had that practice where I investigate and consult to schools and workplaces and municipalities and police departments, conducting internal investigations for them or acting as a hearing officer in cases of sexual misconduct and discrimination. So, and along the way, I also represented a patient of Dr. Roger Hardy, who had sexually abused her. He's a fertility doctor, and he was sexually abusing patients while they were unconscious. And
I remember that
case exposed a 10-year pattern of patient sexual abuse. I mean, these are the most desperate women trying to have children, and this guy is assaulting them while he's supposed to be treating them. And then I also conducted an investigation for the Concord, New Hampshire public schools that resulted in the dismissal and license removal of the superintendent of schools and the high school principal for failing to recognize red flags that a teacher was having sexual relationships with students. So basically for 30 years, more than 30 years, I've done all the same work in different settings, and with the whole goal of trying to rectify injustice and hold offenders accountable for some of the worst behavior imaginable.
Yeah. Yeah. And sex crimes it's awful, awful, awful. It just strips everybody of everything. Can we just back up a little bit?
Yeah,
I just want to hear a little bit
about,
I want to hear a little bit about the Craigslist killer and your involvement in that.
Mhm.
And I think it's funny because we're going to get into Karen Reed as well. But I want to think that Brian Albert was still a police officer at the time and was involved in that.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I was not in the DA's office anymore. I was representing them privately.
Mhm.
And one of the issues was because he had killed himself, could there be a prosecution? And the answer is no. Those cases will get dismissed. But then the second issue was whether or not there would be a civil lawsuit against anybody. Could there be a civil lawsuit against anyone else? And then there was also a legal issue with the DA's office, which was the Suffolk DA at the time, letting us have access to the case files so that we could figure that out.
So interesting. Very interesting case. So obviously 2026 is coming up. We have almost a full 2 years probably, but you're going to be running against Michael Morrissey for Norfolk County DA. So what has inspired you to do this and run against him? I know that everybody watching the show and in the chat has their opinions about Michael Morrissey, but I'd love to hear why you want to challenge him for his seat.
So, I mean, as a former prosecutor, I know how prosecutions are supposed to be done. And I know that this is hard work. It's a really serious job, and it should keep you up. The level of seriousness and the stakes being so high as they are, you really have to have someone highly qualified, with the best judgment and the biggest sort of worldview to make good decisions. And last summer I watched that videotape that the district attorney made, and it was horrifying. Because
the Colin Albert,
the videotape where he comments about the case and he says Trooper Proctor has no reason to lie. I mean, I'm paraphrasing here, but
Colin Albert wasn't in the house.
Yes, he's talking about all the evidence openly, and that is prosecution 101. The prosecutor is not permitted to make any statement that could significantly prejudice a defendant because you're talking to a potential jury pool. If the district attorney is saying this person is guilty, then the jury might think, oh, well, the district attorney thinks he's guilty, so I better, I'm going to find her guilty. And you've ruined the whole case before it has even started. So that was really shocking to me, and I wasn't the only one. So some of your
colleagues.
Oh yes, my former colleagues. The little silent phone, the phone chain is going. What the hell is happening here? This is not normal. And so that was That was kind of when I started paying a little bit more attention. And I will say that I haven't paid attention to it in as granular detail as I'm sure your viewers have. But so several other things started happening that I found disturbing. But then when the news about Sandra Burchmore started coming out, for me, that's a heart stopper, because I don't know about you, but I read the entire affidavit that the FBI filed in the federal case. And it appeared to me from reading that 95% of the evidence that the feds used to indict Matthew Farwell was available to the state authorities shortly after her death. And that is just, and along with the fact that they did not compel him to give a DNA sample, which anyone who's watched Law and Order knows that's the first thing you do, right? Yeah. And they clearly knew immediately that that he was having an affair with her and that he was the last person to see her alive. So, I mean, red flags extraordinaire. And the fact that it took 3 years for anyone to do anything at all for that poor kid is just astounding. I mean, it's like we don't have a government. I mean, if we cannot protect that girl, well, what are we doing?
Yeah, and I'm sure that when you started to read that and look into it, knowing your track record of, prosecuting sex crimes, this probably really hit you personally as well, too.
Yes. I mean, and anyone any prosecutor who has done that kind of work is thinking the same thing.
Yeah. So let's see. I wanted to get into. So, what are your views on the criminal justice reform here in Massachusetts, and how do you plan on implementing changes if you're elected?
So, I mean, to me, I feel like there's three pillars of what a Junah for Justice administration. The first is transparency. I mean, no question. There has to be, and part of transparency means publishing prosecution statistics on the website. So name of case, disposition, date, what the charges were, and that includes null process. I don't know. I can explain what that means.
For sure. Yeah, I don't know. So please.
So the null process is a mechanism by which the district attorney can dismiss a case. And sometimes cases get dismissed because witnesses don't show up for trial, like you wanted to try it, but they don't show up. Therefore, the judge dismisses it. The null process is a mechanism by which the prosecutor just says, you know what? I don't think this prosecution is in the interest of justice. They don't have to tell anybody why they have made that decision. That's where potential problems can happen. Sometimes it's for a very good reason, but that's also where you can hide bad things, bad decisions. And so part of it, so including what cases were null processed. I think a second piece of that is publishing reports of officer-involved shootings. Other DA's offices in Massachusetts do that. Norfolk County does not. With the prosecution statistics, at least one DA in Massachusetts does that, but Norfolk County does not.
Why do you think they don't?
I have no idea. I mean, what I really think is interesting, I was just looking the other day, Middlesex has published those statistics since 2011. And to the extent that there is resistance in the other counties,
for sure,
I'm like, well, clearly the world hasn't ended because they do that. So I think we could probably do it. Yeah. And same with the officer-involved shootings. If everything went right, then there's no problem talking about it. At least in my view. So that's two things. The second piece of is accountability. And in accountability, I think that means the first thing that happens is the state police unit in the DA's office has to be completely replaced.
You think?
And, yeah. I mean, there, that's not to say there may well be people in that unit who are very good, of course, and qualified, and they mean well and they're trying hard. However, I think that the community has lost so much faith in that unit that you can't. No one is going to be able to get any work done unless that unit is fully replaced. The second thing is I think the office needs a top to bottom review of policies, practices, procedures, staff. I would be setting a really high standard of quality and competence and ethics and if people are in the office who are willing to meet those standards, great, they're welcome to reapply for a job. If they're not ready to do that, then they can go somewhere else. So that's another one. Let's see. And then the third piece is community. So I think that we can do a much, much better job really engaging with various community partners. There's two things. One is that what I've noticed in my work in the arena of sexual misconduct, especially that involving kids, is that just like with the Catholic Church cases, parents didn't know. Parents thought that the special attention that Father so-and-so gave them meant that their kid was special. They didn't know that they were being abused. And so one thing I would really like to do, and I found that to be the case in the school cases that I've done over and over and over again, staff get trained. Sometimes kids get a little bit of training about how to stay safe, but not a lot. But parents never get trained. So I would like to see a lot more involvement of explaining to parents and other community members how to avoid how to recognize the danger signs of childhood sexual abuse. And also, how does the system work? How does the district attorney make decisions? Do they, and I think that's something that can be published on the website so that, because there's so many times in an investigation where the district attorney can't tell you what's going on because it would compromise the investigation. So when the things that you can talk about, you should talk about. So that in a particular case, if you're wondering why did they make that decision and they're not talking, maybe you can go, and look up, okay, here's how we make a decision, and you can kind of figure out yourself why this decision might be made. I mean, I think what's really important is because there are so many times that the district attorney can't reveal stuff, in those moments when they're not telling you things, you, the community, have to be confident that it's okay. I know she's doing the right thing, and I can trust her.
Yeah. It's funny that you talk about transparency and getting the updates from, our public officials that handle the laws here in Massachusetts and our systems. and I don't know if you follow this as much as I have been on this channel, but we had a trooper Enrique Delgado Garcia, that was ultimately killed. I mean, at the Mass State Police Academy. And, it just seemed like the news cycle came out, our political officials came out, we had the governor that came out and made a statement, and then it just basically went away. And, what we've been doing here on this channel is rallying for Enrique's family to get some kind of answer. And it would just be nice for someone to step out and say, look, we understand the public outcry right now. We're still actively working on the case, but there hasn't been anything. Nothing, no statement from the state police, no updates from the district attorney, our governor, nothing. And that hurts. I mean, that hurts the community. There's a fallen officer that was put into an institution that was supposed to go there and train. And from what, I've seen of his injury photos and what the family has said to me, I mean, it doesn't look like this was a medical crisis during a boxing training exercise. Now, I do understand that we need a thorough investigation to get to the bottom of it, but it would be nice for someone just to step out. I mean, we're 125 days out from when he passed. Someone to just say, hey, we hear you, and we're going to update you, and we're still actively investigating. I don't know if you knew, but I took out a billboard down the street near Gillette Stadium. And
I think I saw it.
Yeah,
I think I've seen it. No, I mean, look, he was, by all accounts, the ideal person to become a trooper. He was a victim witness advocate in the district attorney's office, and that is a pretty low paid job, and it requires somebody with a huge amount of heart. And that, so he's exactly the kind of person you want to be a trooper. It is astounding to hear this story, especially when you hear that this training exercise was outmoded, and other municipal police departments aren't using it anymore. So the pub, and that, I think, it has a real impact on how the community feels.
Yeah, I mean,
and whether or not the community trusts the government.
And then we don't even know if that story is correct. Did it happen during a boxing training exercise, or was this a targeted beating? Like, we don't know. We don't know. And I just find it interesting that AG Andrea Campbell, 10 days later, puts David Myers on the case as a special investigator. So to me, that tells me, I mean, I'm just using simple logic, that something obviously did not go right there, or something nefarious happened.
Yes. I mean, I can't speculate about Dave Meyer is somebody I worked with in the DA's office also. He's definitely a great person for the job. And I'm sure from his point of view, he probably does not feel like he can talk about it. But I agree with you that somebody has to be able to say, we're still working on it. For sure. It bothers us just as mothers.
Update the public.
Yeah, I know. I think people just, I don't know why. But.
So let's talk about, as speaking now about law enforcement and accountability, I'd love to just see what your takes are. How would you ensure police accountability and transparency within your jurisdiction if you're elected as Norfolk County DA?
So, I mean, the district attorney doesn't supervise police. However, the district attorney is ultimately responsible for any evidence it presents in court to a grand jury. And so the district attorney has to hold the line on what is appropriate evidence and what is not appropriate evidence. The district attorney has to be confident that the charges that they bring can be proved beyond a reasonable doubt, which is an incredibly high standard. And and so we really just can't accept anything less than good evidence. If we find out that a police officer has committed, has done something corrupt or committed a crime, then yes, no one is above the law. I mean, no question, hands down.
For sure.
So yeah.
How do you feel about body-worn cameras?
I love them. I think, so I don't know if you published this, but somehow on YouTube yesterday, I saw this video of a police officer in Sarasota, Florida.
Yes, that was me. Yeah.
That is like my favorite video now.
Yeah.
I was laughing.
For sure. But thank God they had body-worn cameras.
So because
that could have turned into a mess.
But it exactly proves my point for two reasons. If you're a police officer and you're doing your job, body cameras are your friend. That video that you posted yesterday showed the kindest police officer. He instantly recognized that this woman was not a threat. The person he was trying to arrest was a threat. He also knew that she needed to be arrested, no question, but he was patient with her. He was kind to her. He was even kind of, joking around with her a little bit. And when she got a little bit out of control, flirtatious with him, he's professional the entire time. And if it weren't for that body camera, she could have made something up and filed a complaint against him.
100%.
So, I mean, honestly, I, and also from a pure prosecutor perspective, I want video.
Yeah.
I would love video of everything that's happening.
For sure.
So,
for sure. So if you are elected, how would you plan to handle cases of police misconduct or abuse of power?
So, if I think you might be asking, what would I do if there was a conflict?
For sure. Yeah.
Like somebody in the office knows the police officer. I think it sort of depends on the volume. If you can't, it would be hard to get a special prosecutor for every single one. But traditionally what happens is when there is a conflict like that, say, a police officer is accused of a crime and he's related to, he's my brother or something like that.
Right.
Which, don't worry, I'm not related to anyone in the Canton Police Department or any other police officers. But if that were to happen, then it would be considered a conflict. In my day, we would call the AG's office and ask if they could prosecute it for us, and then they would come in and prosecute it. If there was a federal crime, you would refer it to, the FBI or the U.S. Attorney's Office, and so on.
Okay. Let's see. So I asked you about body-worn cameras. Let's look at my notes. I have tons of notes, everybody.
Notes are important.
So in community engagement, how would you ensure that your office is accessible, responsive to the needs of the community, especially unserved populations?
So that is a great question. I think, first of all, it starts with having a staff that reflects the diversity of the community. And I mean diversity in all ways, economic, ethnic, religious, as best you can to be as diverse as possible. I think it means a much more user-friendly office. I mean, starting with the website, which is pretty kludgy, I think is the word that is used. I think also it's having staff dedicated to community outreach and dedicated to being able to spend the time to go out and do those kind of trainings. The other thing I wanted to go back to, one thing I have found fascinating in working with schools is that colleges and independent schools especially have weekly meetings to discuss students of concern. And the concern might be mental health, it might be social, it might be behavior, it might be drugs, it could be anything. But they bring together every person in the school who might have touch points with the student, and they talk about how can we help this kid and make things go better. And I really think that is something that we need to be more, that needs to be more institutionalized among various agencies in a community, so that people who are, kids who are getting bullied at school and they're miserable at school are prevented from becoming school shooters, for example.
And mental health, I mean, it's such a prominent thing in our society now. I mean, we hear that a lot, but I don't think that it's handled or it's not, it's not an applied thing that we look at a lot now. And, that's scary. And I think that, a lot of communities can benefit from that.
There's a new program. I forget there's a phone number for this, but it's where mental health workers go out in conjunction with police officers, and some communities are using this, I think, with pretty good success when there's a question of a mental health issue. And I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. And we don't see that a lot. We don't really see a lot of police officers throughout our communities anymore, touching base with the community.
Yes.
I was saying, even like, I remember the DARE program. I don't even know if they still do that anymore, but those were great programs where police officers went into those communities and talked to kids and got a vibe for the neighborhood and just taught them things to be aware of and signs of people that might be trying to peddle drugs off of them.
Right.
And we don't get a lot of that anymore.
Right. When I was in the DA's office, which all of my colleagues consider the halcyon days of prosecution, community policing was a huge thing. Having the police officer on the beat who knew all the kids in town, knew the elders who might need help when in a snowstorm, or, if it was too hot or whatever, and could go and do those interventions. And I think we really need to get back to that.
Can I just have you push up a little closer to the mic? Because everybody's going, the mic's going in and out.
Sorry, that's me. I will do this.
Even if you can just push up that bottom cord up. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, just to see if it's
loose
or
if
not.
it's
Yeah.
not tight in. Okay.
But if you want to just pull that up a little close. I'm trying not to block
Okay.
Junah's face so everybody can see her, but
I'm
maybe
short.
this works a little bit
better. He said I'm
better.
short, everybody. Just want you to know.
I said, my microphone stand is tall. Okay. So what initiatives do you have in mind to improve relationships between your office, local communities, and law enforcement agencies if you were elected?
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I think that goes back to what I was saying before. I think one is about, doing some boundary trainings for community members. I think also general civics lessons, I think, would be really helpful too. How the criminal justice system works, and also what rights people have in, if your kid is bullied at school. So now I'm thinking about the family in Braintree whose 12-year-old son was taken advantage of by his friends. They had him take his clothes off and then took a picture of him nude and then sent it around school. And that family was told that that was not a crime, and the district attorney refused to prosecute it. Yeah.
Odd.
It is odd because it actually is a crime. Now, it might not get prosecuted because people don't really like to prosecute 12-year-olds if they don't have to.
Right.
But it is very much a problem. So I think that families need to know more about what their rights are in those situations. And for like sexting is another one.
Yeah.
A lot of kids, a lot of girls getting pressured to provide nude photos. Some institutions, some schools are still treating that as when the girl complies and sends the nude, even though she doesn't really want to. Some schools are disciplining the girl and not the person who's pressuring her.
Interesting.
So, yeah, I think all the, and what the other issue that I was talking about before of having more regular kind of consistent meetings with other agencies in communities to brainstorm,
We've
how
just
you can
gotten,
support.
I don't know.
people.
I just feel like with our policing agencies and our communities, we're just getting so far away from laws now. And it's just like you said, I mean, it's younger victims that are getting involved in this stuff. Like the example you just gave of like sexting. And it's amazing. You would think really 20 years ago, we didn't even have a phone in our hand.
Right.
And we were like, I was just talking about this the other night, like the phone that I had to get like a little card and update my minutes on the phone just so I could talk. Right. There's no texting available. Now we literally have a supercomputer in our hand and everything is so instantaneously and so fast. Right. And I can see that, I can see that pressure and now, families are allowing their kids younger and younger to, I saw like a 5 or a 6-year-old that had a phone the other day. I'm like, why does this kid have a phone?
Right. Right. I mean, technology, of course, brings huge challenges. And, we all get these horrible, annoying spam calls all day long. And, people trying to take your money or take your identity constantly. And I think that makes things really stressful. On the bright side, with some of the phone stuff, because they're like documents. So there's screenshots of text messages. In the 80s, we wouldn't have had that.
Yeah.
You would have had one person say, he said this thing to me, he did this thing to me, and somebody else would say, oh, sorry, we have no proof.
Yeah.
But now you got a screenshot and you got a photo with a timestamp, and that stuff, in terms of prosecution, can be quite
everything
helpful.
can be tracked. Yeah, everything can be tracked now, or so they say. If the evidence is not being manipulated and junked around by bad policing. So let's see. I wanted to talk about what are your initiatives do you have in mind? Oh, okay, I just asked that. So how do you? Let's talk about political and ethic considerations. How do you plan on to remain impartial and free of political influences in your decision making as a DA?
Well, I would say that for the past 12 years, my role as an investigator and hearing officer has been to remain neutral. So even though a lot of my background is supporting victims of crime, I also think that due process is really important. And so I'm used to getting a lot of pressure and being, buffeted sometimes from really wealthy parents or really powerful lawyers. And I am someone who can stick to my guns. So I not worried.
And then what measures would you take to prevent prosecutorial
Prosecutorial.
Thank you. Prosecutorial misconduct or abuse of power in office?
So, I mean, there is no question to me that I would not be tolerant at all of any kind of abuse of power. There were cases when I was in the DA's office that looked really, really bad. And in terms of, it looked like a terrible crime had been committed against person X. When I discovered new evidence that actually flipped the case on its head, I dismissed that case. I dismissed those cases. So I don't have a problem following the evidence, finding the truth. That is the point.
Always a good thing. Always a good thing. And then what are your thoughts on mandatory minimum sentences? How would you support reducing them for certain offenses?
So mandatory minimums are fascinating because on the one hand, when I was a prosecutor, what really bothered me about mandatory minimums was that there were mandatory minimums for guns and drugs, but not for violent crime. And violent crime. So we would have people getting nearly killed by someone who with real evil intent.
For sure.
And they'd be getting short jail sentence and probation. And that really, really made me mad because so many victims of crime are women and victims of violent crime are women. And that really bothered me. On the other hand, mandatory minimums are a tool. I mean, they're fundamentally used as a tool by prosecutors to get leverage because it's judges who actually hand down sentences. So if you think a case is really serious, but the judge doesn't, a mandatory minimum can give you a little bit more leverage because you can say, you can get a better, you can say, I'll dismiss the mandatory minimum if you give me a higher, if you agree to a higher penalty than I think the judge might give you. Or you can go to trial. And if you go to trial and you get hooked on the thing that with the mandatory, you're cooked. So it just gives the prosecutor a little bit more power. So, but I also think that it can be abused. And I think that's a problem. So for example, when I was in the DA's office, the school zone minimum mandatory, almost everyone charged with a drug crime in the city of Boston was within the school, was within a school zone. So everybody had these minimum mandatories. And, that's really not fair either. So I think, every case is different. You have to evaluate each case on its own merits. And sometimes those minimum mandatories should be used. Sometimes they should be dismissed.
For sure. And how do you plan to approach prosecuting low-level offenses versus more serious crimes?
Like I said, every case is different. And, I would not have a do not prosecute list. I know that's been a thing bandied about. And I have to say that the do not prosecute list really bothers me from a fundamental level, because first of all, the district attorney is part of the executive branch of government. The job of the executive branch is to enforce the laws passed by the legislature. The legislature passed these laws saying that this certain thing was a crime. And so if you say, I'm never going to prosecute this crime, you're basically saying, I'm not going to do the job that the Constitution, that the Massachusetts state constitution requires me to do, which is absolutely wrong. On the other hand, not every case is worth prosecuting. Prosecutors, that's why prosecutors have discretion like this. I was going to say the other reason that I don't like the do not prosecute list is that there are plenty of low-level crimes that cause real harm. So at the same time, there's a huge difference between a kid who shoplifts because his little brother is hungry, the difference, and also a person who is dependent on drugs and is stealing to feed the habit, and a ring of criminals who are purposely going from store to store and shoplifting and reselling those things on the black market.
We have a major problem with that here in Massachusetts. Really everywhere, but it's really big here in Massachusetts.
So if that gang, the ring thing,
gypsies,
that is a huge offense. That to me, that is really harming a lot of people. And there's also a difference between shoplifting, from stores that, like the little mom and pop store that is suffering every week because some stupid teenagers are shaking them down. I think each of those cases is incredibly different, and you handle them based on those differences.
Yeah. The shoplifting thing is huge here right now in Massachusetts. It's bad for businesses, huge. And like you said, I mean, if a small mom and pop shop keeps getting nailed, on a week in, week out basis, it's just going to ultimately sink. And then the repercussions from that, though, is they have to raise their prices in product, taxes go up. It's just there's no good thing about it.
Right.
There's no good thing about it.
Right. But that is why the prosecutor has so much discretion. So the risk of having that much discretion is that you have so much power. But the bright side is that means that the right person looks at those circumstances and says, okay, what is the real reasonable thing to do? How do we hold this person accountable while having an outcome that is smart, that makes sure that they won't do it again? And I think that's what we really need.
Do you have any alternatives to incarceration?
Sure. I mean,
such as like programs or, restorative justice initiatives.
There's already some pilot programs with restorative justice in, I think in Suffolk is doing one. I think that restorative justice is really interesting. Most people talk about the benefits that it has for defendants, and that's true. But this criminal justice system already has a lot of programs that are good that help defendants get better. There's drug courts already. There's very creative probation programs, and I think that's all great. But I also think that there's a place for restorative justice for crime victims, and the reason is because I've worked with hundreds of victims of the worst crimes imaginable. Most of them, even the ones who are sexually assaulted, victims of domestic violence, the most important thing to them is that they get validation for what happened. That somebody admits, yes, I did this thing that is wrong and it's bad, and I'm sorry. And the criminal justice system isn't really built for that. The outcomes, it's guilty, innocent, jail, or probation, whatever. Mm-hmm. But that's why I think restorative justice, if a crime survivor wants that, can be interesting. And that it might be worth it to them to negotiate a lower sentence if the person was willing to do some of those restorative justice processes. I mean, and there are DA's offices around the country that are doing this with even in violent crime cases, with some pretty good success.
What do you think about these people that are, I guess like constant repeat offenders that just keep, pushing the same thing over and over again, and then it gets to this ultimate level where someone ends up getting hurt or killed? What can you do in those instances to stop something like that, or stop someone from getting to that level?
Yeah, I mean, so the criminal justice system is we learn in law school and criminal law that there are several functions of punishment. One function is separation from society. Another function is deterrence, like to make sure to make people afraid to commit a crime. Right. We're going to punish you. Another one is retribution, which is like justice. And another one is rehabilitation. And the criminal justice system is sort of designed so that the first offense, assuming it's not a terrible one, you kind of get not a slap on the wrist, but you get a chance.
For sure.
You shouldn't get a conviction, maybe, if at all possible. You do some probation, you do some restitution, some other things that help restore the balance of the world. But then, the next time you do it, it's supposed to keep going up and, it's supposed to keep ramping up. And if you do something super serious, regardless, it should be treated that way. DAs only have so much control over the sentences. Judges do the sentencing. And, there are sentencing guidelines, and those, I think most judges are using those, and they kind of have a grid, literally, of like, what's the prior conduct like? What's this conduct like? What do other people get in the same circumstance? And you kind of can pick the grid, and you can diverge from that based on particular circumstances, which I also think is good. But yeah, and I think you need programs that actually help people get change. And there's one, I want to say it's the Menendez brothers. Mm-hmm. Did you read about this in the Globe? That is fascinating to me. I think those programs are great, which was like where people are at. Oh, and there's another one I think that was just in the paper last week where some prisoners are getting paid jobs in jail that will allow them, when they leave, to actually have a job
in society. Yeah. Can you explain the relationships between DAs and judges, how that all works? Is there a lot of communication through that, outside communication, or it's usually You
Yes.
on them side, them on one side, and you on the other. Yeah.
Yes. So there, it's once you become a judge, you kind of go into this black hole where your only friends are judges. And I mean, literally, I can't. There's many people I was a prosecutor with are now judges. Can't talk to them.
You
anymore.
don't talk to them.
Maybe you run into them at some kind of bar event, but even then, like, you can't. There, there's a really strict rules about ex parte communications, meaning communications outside of court about a case. Huge no. So
yeah, it's interesting how once you get into certain sections of government, it kind of
changes.
It changes a lot.
Yeah. Which is a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. What I want to do is just ask you a couple more questions, and if you don't mind, I know the audience is waiting. If we can talk a little bit about Karen Reed, the Karen Reed case and the trial that's going on. We were talking a little bit before we went live, but let me just sneak these two questions in.
Sure.
We'll talk a little bit about it, and we'll take some questions from the audience. I think it'd be great. And I want to thank Junah for coming in again. This has really been an eye-opening experience and very educational for myself too.
Thank you.
So what I do is, so what specific experience do you have in criminal law that prepares you to be an effective DA?
So I was a prosecutor for 10 years.
Your experience, obviously. Yeah.
I've also done some criminal defense, not a ton, but enough. I definitely have that. Yeah.
How about what's your long-term vision for criminal justice system in our district, and how would you achieve that?
Well, that's a big essay question. So my long-term vision is that Norfolk County has the best law office in Norfolk County, maybe even in Massachusetts altogether, that every assistant district attorney, every victim witness advocate is guided only by, trying to provide a voice for crime victims, trying to do that while holding to standards of due process, because only when you have convictions supported by due process will everyone support convictions.
It was funny because we were talking just before we went on air, and you said that you've been in Suffolk County for quite a while, and then you started kind of looking into Norfolk County. You said it was such a great county before, and now it just seems an ultimate swamp over there.
Right. And what's really sad about that is that Norfolk County is really the seat of Massachusetts. This is where John Adams lived.
Yeah.
And John Adams is the one who wrote the Declaration of Rights for Massachusetts, which is the state constitution, and it is on that basis that the federal constitution was written. So really, we are in the heart of democracy, and we deserve so much better.
It's so interesting. You go back and you look at the whole Boston Tea Party and the Declaration of Independence and what we've done. This is such a historic state. So many things as far as applying the law to society happened here in Massachusetts, and how straight all our forefathers wanted that to be. And it just seems like it's all over the map here in Mass. I mean, I can't. It's like every other day there's some corrupt law enforcement or an official that's in trouble, or there was a guy a cop down in Barnstable. Brewster last year that got caught with like CP on his phone, and just this disgust. Like where are these people? Like what's going on here? Where's our checks and balances?
I don't know, but that's why local government is so important. I mean, it's what the expression "all politics is local." It's true. I mean, when John Adams was sitting on his farm, he was looking out his window going, I think I need to do something about that. And he was just a lawyer too.
Yeah.
I think he was a criminal defense attorney. He represented the soldiers in the Boston Massacre.
Yes.
The British soldiers in the Boston Massacre. So this is how it happens. People, you see a problem and you have an obligation to go and fix it.
All right. Can we talk a little bit about the Karen Reed trial?
Go ahead.
Okay. Let's see. And let me just do this really quick. I'm just going to acknowledge something that happened here in the chat. Hang on one second. We'll pause for a second here. Peggy, thank you so much for gifting the 10 memberships. I appreciate that. So that's 10 free memberships on Peggy for some new members to come in. You get access to all the members only content, and you can see that on my homepage. Just scroll all the way to the bottom. and you'll get all the members only content. And Hot Wheels is a 1-month member. So thanks for using your highlight. And you said, great interview. Everybody's loving the interview so far. They're like, I would vote for Junah. She's so well-spoken.
Thanks.
So, all right, let's talk a little bit about the Karen Reed case. So what is the extent that you have followed it? You know, if you can tell us a little bit about your thoughts, and I'd just love to hear what you have to say about that.
Yeah. So like I said earlier, I really only started paying attention to it when the video came out. And then I started looking at it more closely. I wasn't watching the trial every day. I did watch the closing. Or at least I watched the closing, I think, of the prosecutor. And the things that concerned me the most were the charging. So the video, the charging decisions.
And you're talking about the Morrissey video.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the one. Yeah.
Right. Not the in trial.
Right.
videos.
Right. Yeah.
The trooper proctor tapes.
Yep.
Or texts. And the way the DA's office handled that. And then the failure to really deal with some significant discrepancies in the evidence. Mostly I'm talking about the accident reconstruction, the FBI accident reconstruction experts, and the charging, the decision to charge her with to proceed to trial on both a murder charge and OUI, motor vehicle homicide.
Yep.
Yeah. I think those are the things that really, I'm sure there are more if I were to sit and study the transcripts and everything. But yeah, those were the main things. Those were enough.
Yeah. Let's see. So I just had some questions from viewers, and again, I'm not sure if you're going to be answer these, but I'll throw them at you and see what your feelings are. So why would DA Morrissey need to waste taxpayers' money outside of his office to prosecute a case which doesn't claim a conflict? And then was not any attorney in his office capable or willing to retry this case?
Right. Well, so I don't know the inside baseball on that because I don't know Mike Morrissey. But you're absolutely right. I mean, the decision to hire a special prosecutor in this case was strange because there's two reasons that you would hire one. One, because you need the expertise, or two, because you think that you have a conflict. If you think that you have a conflict, why didn't you hire the special prosecutor 3 years ago? If you think that you don't have the expertise, why didn't you make that hire 3 years ago? So yeah, I agree. I think it was an odd decision, especially since, a special prosecutor usually operates entirely independently of the office. And here they have him working with the office, which to me just sort of muddles up the whole thing. If you were trying to do this so that people would have greater trust in the way you're handling the case, I don't think it worked. And it seems like it was a political decision, political pandering rather than the decision of a wise prosecutor. And
Hank Brennan, you said you know of him. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And your relationship with him, or?
No, I mean, not current, but I was saying earlier that the prosecution world is actually fairly small. So a lot of these players I know, or at least know by reputation. So yeah.
So let's put the mob guy in there as a special prosecutor. Okay. Let me just throw this one at you too. Readily, it's been reported that the first Karen Reed trial cost the Commonwealth $750,000, with a retrial expected to cost at least that much. How is that justified to the taxpayers?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, as DA, you do have to prioritize, put your resources where they should go, and it makes you question if you're spending all that money. You only get so much money, and if you're spending that much money on one case, what are you spent? How can you have enough resources to prosecute other cases, especially like the murder of Anna Walsh? That's a case that if you said, okay, what's the most important case to spend a huge amount of money on? That's a big one. But anytime you're going to retry a case, that is a big decision, and you don't make it lightly. You don't make it the same day.
Yeah.
So, which is not to say that the life of John O'Keefe did not merit a heck of a lot of work to figure out what happened to him. That is absolutely justified. I can't imagine what his family has gone through, But the other thing about the decision to retry the case is it puts that family through this all over again. And especially those kids who had to testify and who first had to lose their parents, then had to lose their uncle, and now they have to testify, and maybe now they have to testify again. So that is not a decision that you ever would make lightly.
Hmm. And then just going back and looking back to, reassessing and possibly retrying this, we may get it, we may not, but it's looking like it's really going to go to what we're calling Karen Read 2.0. Why would Morrissey not reassess the prosecution of Karen Read, given the exculpatory evidence? We talked about ARCA before we went live.
Mm-hmm.
That was the independent firm that was hired literally by the FBI.
Mm-hmm.
When they came in and looked at all the data and did their experimentation. They came to the conclusion of, Karen Read did not make any contact with John O'Keefe's vehicle, and Karen Read's make contact with John O'Keefe, and John O'Keefe didn't make any contact with Karen Read's vehicle. And then, like I said, provided by federal investigators. And it's really strange to me that has been kind of the big hanging thing on this, that we can't bring in the federal investigation into this trial,
Mm-hmm.
which it's very strange. I mean, the data is there.
Mm-hmm.
There's thousands of pages of, this investigation that the FBI did, but it's not going to be allowed to come to the trial. It seems odd to me.
Oh, so wait, so did the judge rule on that?
Yes.
Oh, and
Not allowed to talk about the FBI investigation.
So even the accident reconstruction?
Yeah, they allowed them to come in, but they
Oh.
weren't allowed to tell the jury
Oh.
who they actually were. So we had to kind of dance around this. It's interesting. The jury thought that they were people that were hired by the insurance company to come in and do this.
Oh, I know.
It's just so
it's because
odd.
it's maybe it's because the FBI has so much authority. So the second you say, "Oh, this is an FBI expert," that
Mhm.
that they were hired by the FBI, it kind of gives them this extra credential that maybe isn't warranted or something.
But it was, and again, I know you didn't follow the trial
Mhm.
too closely, but it made apparent during pretrial hearings that, it is independent. It wasn't hired by the prosecution, wasn't hired by the defense. It was an
Right.
independent organization coming in.
Right.
I just find that very strange that, nope, can't allow that to come into the trial.
Right.
I mean, it's just very odd.
Right.
Odd to me. Let's see. Take some questions from the audience.
Sure.
Okay. Let's do this. If anybody has a question, and I'll kind of handpick these as we go along, just type a Q in the chat and put your question. Oh, we already have our first one. Mary says, would it be okay to lie and say shards of taillight were found on a sleeve when testimony says no? This is very specific to the Karen Read case. So,
well, it's never okay to lie,
Right.
to a court, and it's never okay for a district attorney to knowingly allow a witness to lie. That is a bar. That's a bar disciplinary violation.
Mm-hmm. Again, if you have a question for Junah, just type a Q and put your question, and then we'll bring them up on screen and I can read them to her. Let's see. Takes a minute. The chat's a little bit behind.
Oh, sure.
Sometimes. So what are you going to be doing now going in? When is your campaign really going to start lifting off here and getting, I know we're a little ways out from 2026, but what are your plans now for your campaign?
Well, just this morning, I was at the Needham polls, walking around meeting people. In my mind, it already is game on. It's, we announced in September, and I've been out there at the polls and trying to doing podcasts like this. Yeah.
Great. So, Cop's daughter's asking, are there consequences for lies?
Of witnesses?
Yeah, I believe so. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, let's see. Joe Flipperhead checking in says, can she expand on how it didn't sit well with her when the DA office was charging her with murder 2 and OUI of manslaughter? And I think that's the Karen back to Karen Read's.
So here's the thing. When you decide to bring charges against someone, you have to be sure that you are, pretty darn well sure that you have sufficient evidence to convict beyond a reasonable doubt, which is an incredibly high standard. So to tell, and so that when you tell the family, here's what we're going to prosecute them for, you're not promising something you cannot provide, you can't give. And that's what I think is the most fundamental error here, that was really a travesty for the family of John O'Keefe, because the charges were the charge of murder requires specific intent to kill. And that is a pretty, that's a pretty specific thing that you have to prove. So it's hard to prove. And they also presented evidence that and charged her with OUI manslaughter. And they presented evidence that her blood alcohol content at the time of that she was at the house with him was 0.29, and that's 3 times the legal limit, the legal blood alcohol limit. If you are that drunk, there is no way you can form the specific intent to kill. So by proceeding to trial on both of those things at the same time, you're telling the jury 2 diametrically opposed things. Well, which one was it? Was she so drunk that she didn't know what she was doing? Or was she so mad at him that she wanted to kill him? You can't have both. So the fact that they did that left the jury with no coherent story. And what being a trial attorney is really all about is being able to tell a coherent story in a way that is supported by the evidence that will make sense to a jury, so that the jury can just go, oh, I get it, check, and move on. And because of their mistakes, there was no resolution, and that is really unfair. Not only to John O'Keefe's family, and also to Karen Reed and her family.
Yeah, and I said that before we came on air. I just feel like, as far as her fair trial, I feel like a lot of her rights have been infringed on. I mean, there's been so many roadblocks, and even just going back to what we were just talking about, why not be able to bring this federal investigation and of evidence that they made these discoveries? It's just, we can't talk about that. It's very interesting. Very interesting.
And that's really the problem.
Kind of scary, actually.
Sometimes there might be a good explanation for something, but the problem is when there is misjudgment after misjudgment after error, you lose credibility, so that no one believes you. The one time you're actually saying something that is true, people are like, yeah, no, I don't believe you anymore. Forget it. That's exactly how it is to try a case, by the way. Like that, with a witness. The witness is, has a problem, like Proctor. That's why Proctor is a problem, because he says this thing that's not believable, this thing that makes him unbelievable, and then he tells you the one thing that is actually true. No one cares.
Yeah. 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 Lawfero says, what's your list of reasons why you would be a better prosecutor than Morrissey?
Well, this is such a fantastic question. The current district attorney was never a prosecutor before he was elected. He was a lifetime politician, and I believe he even practiced law only for a very short time before he got elected to be state rep. I was actually a prosecutor. I have tried dozens of cases in the district and superior courts of Massachusetts. I've been to the appeals court. I've been to the SJC. This is my wheelhouse.
Someone says, if you were handed 3,000 pages of exculpatory evidence by the DOJ, would you proceed with this case, meaning the Karen Reed case?
Well, the obligation of the prosecutor is to turn over that exculpatory evidence. I can also tell you that, having represented people in similar situations in Norfolk County, representing a criminal defendant, I have had the experience of having someone who should not be charged and was still charged anyway.
Not good. Lauren's asking, how does Junah feel about Morrissey having all the messages auto-delete after 30 days? Is that acceptable or suspicious?
What messages? On his phone, or his emails,
phone,
or something?
his texts and phones, yeah.
Is it his work phone?
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. I don't know if I wonder if there are statewide standards for that, that he's violating. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's definitely a valid point.
Yeah.
And if there isn't a regulation about it, there probably should be.
Should be. Exactly. I'm sorry. You got a ton of
no, go ahead.
questions here. You spoke on the Sandra Burchmore case. Can you go more into how you would handle her case going forward if you were DA?
So that is also a great question. Because the feds have now indicted him for federal crimes, that could result in as much as execution, but more likely would become life in prison. It makes the decision to proceed on a state murder charge more complicated, because what would be the ultimate result in Massachusetts if Matthew Farwell was convicted of murder? The ultimate penalty is life in prison.
Mhm.
And so there's this practical piece of what more would you get from it? You'd be putting that family again, through a whole trial process again, and not for much more benefit than you've already gotten through the feds. But the real travesty there is that the state, the community in which a person lives, is the entity with the greatest vested interest in prosecuting murder. And that is why there is a state murder charge. And the fact that the feds had to intervene and make those charges, which usually, if there had been a state murder charge, the feds would have deferred. And if they prosecuted at all, they probably would have waited until after the murder charge was resolved, to give the state the first crack. So I think that's really what the travesty is that the local community has been deprived of the right to pursue charges in her death.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that go on in Canton, and someone's asking, lots of women have stood up against the corruption in Canton. Does that scare you at all? To take on such corruption?
No, bring it on.
Love that answer. Enrique Delgado Garcia, we talked a little bit about that earlier. That's earlier in the episode, but that's a great question about the thoughts on Enrique Delgado Garcia. If you want to just talk a little bit more about that. And we were saying that, we're almost 125 days past his death, and just really hasn't been any new information, nothing from our political leaders that say, hey, we understand the community's concern. We're still investigating. There's nothing. So how does that make you feel?
Well, it's funny when, I do so much in the Title IX world, and we constantly have to update the parties in a case about whether or not, about the status of the case. And, even if you're not done yet, you do need to tell them something. And there's definitely a community. I think sometimes people don't realize the impact of a crime on the community. So what happened to Enrique appears to have been a crime, for at least from reading the newspapers. And that causes us all a lot of harm. Even if you don't even know the person, it is really upsetting. So, one story I'll just tell that's somewhat related is when I was I had a witness come to the grand jury when I was a young prosecutor. And it was a stabbing case. A woman had been stabbed at night at near a gas station. And this other woman who was the witness, young professional woman, she was on a date with her boyfriend. They had to get gas. He gets out of the car to get the gas. She's still sitting in the car. And by the lights of the headlights, she saw this woman right in front of her eyes getting stabbed.
Wow.
I subpoenaed her to grand jury. At the grand jury, she comes in. She never questioned once her obligation to come and testify. She said, okay, I'm here. Yes, I will tell you. Here's my story. She testifies. As she's testifying about a stranger, somebody she doesn't even know, doesn't care about beforehand, tears start streaming down her face. She is, and I just thought, my takeaway from that is the impact of crime on a community is enormous. And also, if people don't trust the system, they will not participate. They will not report crime. They will not participate. They will not agree to come to be witnesses. They will not agree to participate as jurors. And then we're really all screwed. But the fact that one woman was like, I will give up time out of my day. I have to take the T, go to get downtown, and I will tell this story about this complete stranger. That is what we need. And that kind of community responsibility for each other, and the government recognizing that this is what people need, that's what we need to have.
We need a lot of changes in Norfolk County. It's bad. I mean, there's no community trust there in anything that happens. And it's like it just seems like we have so many high profile cases that come out of that county. It's like, oh my God, like what is.
But I think that it can change. There have been other cities, it just takes chipping away. And it's hard work, but we're not strangers to hard work, are we?
No, I definitely know I'm not. I'm
Right.
definitely know I'm not. And obviously, with your experience and everything that you've done, you're not afraid of this as well. And this is another case that's been very high profile here in Massachusetts. And I have a question. I'm not sure if you know about this case, but just on route. So just on Route's family has been asking for an independent investigation for 5 years because there were many issues with his case. Would you ever consider looking into the evidence that they have collected?
So anytime there is new evidence in a case that is credible, of course it should be looked at. And that's another thing, is that I can't tell from the district attorney's website if there's an unsolved cases unit. I do believe that they have a conviction integrity unit, and those things should definitely be continued, expanded on. So yeah, I mean, anytime law enforcement gets credible information to suggest that a decision that they made earlier was wrong, you have an obligation to check it out.
That's great. It's great to know that. So I don't know. So what is your upcoming campaign? Do you have anything planned? Any appearances? Obviously, we can find you at your website, and I'm going to show everybody the website right now. But if feel free, any upcoming. Do you update your events on your page or?
Yes.
Okay.
So we're kind of in the range where we're starting house parties and fundraisers. I had a official fundraiser, or a sort of soft fundraiser in December. I'm going around to all the Democratic town committees, meeting with people there, going to local events. I'm happy to go visit somebody, go visit anybody's local event. I like people.
That's good.
I like people.
Yeah.
So it's fun.
Yeah. And you can check out Junah. It's JunahPerkins.com. And I've dropped her link in the chat. We'll take one more question here. Greg is asking, and thank you, Greg, for the $10. Appreciate that. He says, what is Ms. Perkins' opinion on how she thinks the Mass Supreme Court will rule regarding the double jeopardy issue presenting in the Karen Reed case?
So that's a good question too. And it's kind of a complicated answer. I really don't know. It's actually, from the layperson's point of view, it seems like common sense. Of course they should, if this is what the jury thought, they should just get rid of those charges. But it's a more complicated legal issue than you'd think. And that's because of the sanctity of jury deliberations. So there's all this case law that says we never want to ask jurors what they were thinking about, what they were talking about, because if you do that, then jurors are exposed and they may not ever want to participate again. So there's like this kind of principle that we don't ever do that. But the more specific question of, should the judge have asked, did you make a decision on this charge, and this charge? That one has, I think, not been decided in Massachusetts. So the SJC is going to be looking to other states to see what they have done, especially states that have similar, the most similar laws and principles to ours. So yeah, I don't know. I think they're going to be reluctant to do it because they tend to be so pretty conservative on. If you look at any of the cases on the sanctity of jury conviction, of jury deliberations, they tend to just say, nope, we don't do that.
Yeah.
But the fact that they took the case means something too.
For sure. Any final thoughts?
So I think I'm a mom. I have 3 adult kids. I was a primary caregiver for an adult with a serious illness. I think, I grew up knowing that not everybody gets dealt the same deck of cards. And I think, and justice is really, really important to me. And I went to law school to make the world better for everybody else. And that's what I want to do in Norfolk County. Yeah,
we definitely need to get it cleaned up. Norfolk County is bad. Really, really. And, and I think just in instilling trust in our police, our state police as well, too. I mean, it's got a track record there and it's pretty evident. There's been a lot printed about it. Just even going back to the CDL scams, we've talked about Trooper Proctor today, and just really getting that cleaned up and building truth and transparency back in our communities. That's what we need here. We need someone that's going to give us truth and transparency.
Yeah, I think,
Excuse me.
I feel like there is hope, because I think that there's plenty of people in law enforcement and prosecution who are also incredibly concerned.
100%. Yeah.
And I think partly it's about relationships. So, it's police chief by police chief who cares about making things right. I also would just throw in this one little bit that early on, right after I announced, I was at this meet and greet with police chiefs.
Mm-hmm.
And I asked, how is what's going on in Norfolk County affecting your day to day? And they said 201, meaning every single one said, this is horrible. This is not what policing is about. This is not who we are. And this makes us all look terrible. Mm-hmm. So, everybody needs to be more like the police officer we saw in your video from the other night.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, hopefully, this gets cleaned up. You give Michael Morrissey a run for his money, and you take over this seat and get things. It's going to take a lot, I think. I think it's going to take a lot to get this cleaned up, but we can't.
Hopefully, it won't take that much to get elected. But
just get in there and clean it all out, because we're tired of it here in Norfolk County, and just bringing back and instilling truth and transparency in our agencies. I mean, we pay the salaries. We're the taxpayers. And it's time to get it cleaned up. So.
Right. And everybody should feel like, even if they don't get the outcome they wanted, that they were treated fairly, that their concerns were heard, that their arguments were heard, and that they weren't treated like crap.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. That is Djuna Perkins. She's running for Norfolk DA in 2026. When is the election?
September of 26.
So we got a little ways to go.
It's a primary, so Democrats beware.
You're already hitting the road here, and that's awesome. You can find her at junaperkins.com. And I want to thank you. You're my first political guest here on LTL Media. And anytime you need a platform, just call me. We'll come in. If you have any concerns or anything you want to talk about,
okay,
let me know.
Thank you so much.
All right, we're going to hit the outro here. And thank you all so much for checking out this episode. I appreciate everybody jumping in. And that's going to be it. We'll be back on Thursday night. I'll have Todd McGee here live, 7:15 p.m. I hope to see everybody then. Take care. Have a good night, everybody.